Today, I want to show you my once a week bread routine so that I have fresh bread all week long. Now, this particular method came about quite by accident. Like most things that happen good in the kitchen, they come whenever maybe you forgot about something or you accidentally added one thing to another thing. So last week I had some friends in town. I shared about that here on my YouTube channel a couple videos back. I wanted to have fresh bread in the morning, but I also didn't want to be doing baking while they were here. So on one of the days, I whipped up one of my sourdough bread recipes with all of the stretching and folding. I doubled it, which ended up making for 4 loaves. And then I put them all in the refrigerator at a certain stage and then brought them out each day and baked them. Now, I didn't actually plan to do that. I was gonna just bake all 4 loaves, but things got really busy really fast because I needed to get everything ready. And so I realized that I actually really loved the flavor and the rise and the texture of the bread that sat in the refrigerator a little bit longer. So that's what I'm gonna show you today, how you can spend maybe a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning getting a bunch of dough together and then enjoying fresh sourdough bread all through the week. All right, now the first thing I'm gonna do is get my 5-gallon bucket of wheat berries out from the cabinet and mill them in my mill. Now for this recipe, I don't do all whole wheat, but I do a certain portion of it, and I'm gonna be tripling my original recipe so that way I have bread for 6 days or 6 loaves of bread. Of course, if you wanna do the full 7 days or 8 days, you can quadruple it. Whatever you wanna do. I only have room in my fridge for about 6 days, but I can plan on the fact that one of the 7 days we won't need bread. It's good to have these kind of routines in the kitchen because they take a lot of the planning and thought out of something. It's just something that you do. I have so many routines in my kitchen. Baking bread isn't one of them. And so I find that I make bread a lot, but I don't have this routine where I always know I'm gonna have fresh bread. And doing something like this really eliminates that thought process. My original sourdough bread recipe that I'm using for this calls for a mixture of whole grain wheat, all-purpose, and bread flour. I didn't plan enough, and so I don't have probably enough bread flour to triple this. That's okay. In situations like that, I just go ahead and substitute out all-purpose in that case. If I don't have any whole wheat, I substitute all-purpose in its place. Usually for this recipe, the one thing I wouldn't substitute out 100% would be all whole wheat. Though I do have a recipe like that, and in that case, I do a honey whole wheat, which makes it soft and light, as opposed to this one, which only has salt, water, flours, and sourdough starter. I want you to see how bubbly it is. So this is sourdough starter at its peak rise. This means that the yeasts are really active in this sourdough starter, and it will give my bread the best lift. So you can make bread whenever it's not at its peak. I do find best results when it is. Either way, it turns out beautifully. Like I mentioned, I am going to triple this recipe, which will yield 6 loaves of bread. I have 2 large bowls. So what I'm gonna do is I've tripled the recipe and then divided that in 2. So basically I'm doing 1.5 in each bowl. So whenever I go to divide this, I will be getting 3 loaves of bread from each bowl. So I'm just gonna zero out my scale here. And the first thing I'm gonna add is 750 grams of unbleached all-purpose flour. Again, this is 1.5 times the recipe or 3 loaves. I like to zero my scale out in between each one. Of course, you could just keep adding on top of it, but to me, it's easier just to zero it out. Next, I'm gonna add to that 300 grams of whole wheat flour that I just milled. If you're adding it straight on top, obviously be careful not to throw in too much at once. I'm totally fine though, just removing it. Even if I grab a little all-purpose, it still turns out just fine. I used to be intimidated by these beautiful sourdough loaves because the instructions can vary widely and sometimes they're so precise. Turns out there's a lot more margin for error than you might have expected. I'm going to zero out my scale and do 375 grams of bread flour. Again, I don't have enough, so I have about 200 grams. I'm gonna do the rest in all-purpose, and then the other 1.5 times the recipe will just be all-purpose and whole wheat, which will turn out really just fine. All right, I'm gonna zero it out again, and now add my beautiful bubbly sourdough starter. I'll be adding 300 grams of this. It just feels so light and fluffy right now. I'm gonna zero my scale out and do 975 grams of water. Looks like that is like almost exactly a quart, a little bit less. We're gonna need some really large bowls for this. And hopefully mine fits. I might have to use another one. All right, and then salt. I'm gonna zero out my scale and do 30 grams of salt. You just want sea salt, something like that, not really iodized salt. Okay, that's exactly 30 grams. And now I'm just gonna work this together with my hands. Now I'm just gonna repeat in my other big bowl 1.5 times the recipe, the exact same thing I just did. Now, bonus points, if you do these all at the same time before mixing them up, then you only have to get your hands dirty 1 time. I did not do that. What I have here now are 2 very full bowls, each with 3 loaves of bread. And I'm just going to go through my normal steps now of making this into bread all the way to the shaping in the banneton basket. And I'll show you from there. So at this point, I need to let both of these autolyze. That just basically means that the flour needs to fully absorb all of the liquids, all the water, the starter, before working the dough anymore. You will see that the dough looks really messy at this stage, but after it sits a while, so this first bowl here, it's been sitting while I've mixed up this one, it already feels a lot nicer. Like I could create it into a nice little ball. There's a little bit of stretch for my stretch and folds, but I'm gonna do that shortly. So I'm gonna let this sit about a half hour and then show you the next step in the process. Now I do want to note to you the time of day. So it is currently afternoon. This morning, I fed my sourdough starter so that it'd be nice and fluffy by this point. So the starter sat from about 7:30 a.m. to about 1:30 in the afternoon, and that is when I'm actually starting this. So I'll perform my series of stretch and folds over the next couple of hours, and then it'll have a bulk ferment until about 9 o'clock tonight. Then I'll be able to shape it and get it in the refrigerator before going to bed. So if you start by feeding your starter first thing in the morning, get these mixed up during like an afternoon nap or something, that's a good way to time it so you can get it in the fridge before bed. While I was waiting for this to absorb everything, I got started on photographing something for the blog, so that's what all this is here. Now I'm gonna do some stretch and folds. This is just where you give the dough some elasticity and structure. It's what makes those big bubbles that you see in sourdough bread. Essentially what I'm gonna do is take one side of this dough and just stretch it up like this. Now if it feels a little wet, it's helpful to have your fingers wet before working the dough. It won't stick when you do that. Now be mindful that if you use too much water, of course you're introducing more liquid to the dough, but I do often have my fingers wet so that I can make sure that the dough doesn't stick too much to my fingers. Now you'll notice I pulled up from one side, stretch it over, and then I'm just going around in a circle. I usually do about 4 stretch and folds each time. It'll be a lot more elastic in some of the future stretch and folds. So this is just the first one. Technically, you're supposed to space these out very evenly, set your timer. I can tell you that I did all of that for a while, and now I just come over and stretch it and fold it every once in a while for a couple hours, and then I leave it alone to let it bulk rise after that. And if you're confused on the terminology, bulk rise just means that you're just letting it rise. I believe it's called the bulk ferment because you're just letting it sit for a long time as opposed to revisiting it and working the dough in any way at all. Now you could take the same recipe and just knead it in your mixer with the dough hook as opposed to doing stretch and folds. I do find with the longer fermented breads that they do better when sourdough, when long fermented, with the stretch and folds. Versus like something like my brioche that I have sitting here, it's a shorter process. So I started it last night, today it's already baked. I don't mind kneading that. But with something like this, that's some of this dough is gonna be in the refrigerator for many days. It's a longer process, it does better with these stretch and folds. Now I like to, after each stretch and fold, work the dough back into a nice little circle. I usually just kind of cup it with my hand and make sure it's smooth and elastic. We're already getting a few bubbles on the surface. It's amazing though how some very scruffy dough comes together after the 30-minute rest period and the first stretch and fold. You can really work it without it sticking to your fingers and feel very smooth and elastic, and that's what you're going for. All right, I'm gonna leave this alone for about another 20 to 30 minutes and then come over and perform another series of stretch and fold on both of these. I have one more stretch and fold to go. I have my bread dough with tea towels over it because we have flies in our house. I want to take a break while I'm waiting to do that next stretch and fold and then it's bulk ferment to tell you about today's video sponsor, Thrive Market. Thrive Market is an online grocery store that has all kinds of natural and organic products. My favorite on Thrive Market is the Thrive Market brand. It's like the grocery store brand. Very economical, low price. Thrive Market even has a price match guarantee. So if there's something that you find at your local grocery store and you find a better price there, they will actually match it. I love that I can get things at Thrive Market that I just can't get locally. So for example, I get my all-purpose einkorn flour for a lot of my recipes on Thrive Market. I always stock the einkorn pasta, a great thing to have on hand for a really quick dinner. Throw in some vegetables, maybe a little cheese. It makes an easy summer dinner. I also buy supplements, spices, coconut oil, so many regular things that I'm always purchasing from Thrive Market. I've been a customer long before they sponsored this channel and have loved finding those organic options for a lower price. Thrive Market allows you on their website to shop by dietary preference. So if you're paleo, gluten-free, dairy-free, you can find those options and then make it a really easy, streamlined shopping experience that you're only seeing the things that you want. Thrive Market has two different membership options. They have the $59.95 a year that saves you quite a bit of money versus doing it month to month at $9.95 a month. But if it's something that you just want to try out, see if they have any items that you love using in your kitchen that you can find for a cheaper price, or maybe you can't find locally, try it out and see if it's something that you want to continue using. They are offering you, if you're a first-time customer, 30% off your first order plus a free gift worth up to $50. With my link, thrivemarket.com/farmhouse on Boone, you can also find it linked down in the description box below. All right, it is getting late, or it's about 8 o'clock. We have baseball games, and I've come home to some quite bubbly dough, if you can see that here. We're gonna do the final step that's going to, or final couple steps. It's going to get these into the refrigerator. I did cover it with foil. I like to do something kind of airtight, whether it's beeswax wraps or plastic wrap, something that won't expose this to the air. It'll get one of those harder films on the top, if not for something airtight. So I'm just going to dump this dough out onto a lightly floured surface and then divide this into thirds because this is going to be 3 loaves of bread. Try to be careful to not completely deflate it. I used to shape the dough after letting it sit out for a little bit here. I'm gonna just go ahead and shape it now and then let it sit a little bit to develop a small film on top before putting it into my Banata baskets. So to do this, I'm just gonna wrap it over itself from one side and then the other side, and then gently turn it over and add a little bit of tension to the dough by rotating it. And I'm gonna repeat that for the other two. And then I'm gonna repeat with my other bowl. there's a few ways you can do this. Now, the first time I did this to make bread once for all week, sourdough, is I put them in various baskets. I have quite the collection. So I can let this just sit in the fridge like this. You might not have as many as I do. In that case, you could just shape and add to a banneton a few hours before baking. But for me, I like to just take them directly out of the banneton basket into the hot cast iron Dutch oven. And so I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Now I just get them in some plastic bags. They can go into the refrigerator without getting any fridge smells. I like to have it airtight. Usually I just do like a Walmart bag and then just tie it on the ends. And I'll show you where I actually fit this in my fridge. So for me, I have this lower drawer here in my refrigerator that is for vegetables. Right now it's actually kind of empty because we are out of a lot of stuff that I need to get. But these baskets are actually really shallow. And so there's a lot of places throughout my refrigerator that I can snug them in. I kind of puzzle piece a lot of them down in here. And then I also put some on the top shelf or on top of the leftovers. I covered a few with foil, a few with plastic bags. And just like that, I am now ready to shut the fridge, and then all throughout the week throw in bread to bake, which I will take you along with as well. All right, this morning I'm gonna make my first loaf. I just pulled it out of the refrigerator in its banneton basket. I have my Dutch oven preheating at about 450 or 500. I'm not super particular about any of this process, which you have already noticed, I'm sure. It always turns out great once you have down the basics. So, one thing not to forget under any circumstance is your parchment paper. I did that last week just by complete accident and it does stick very badly. So I'm gonna put my parchment paper here and then I'm just gonna score it really fast. Now, you can get real fancy with this. I think I'm just gonna do a quick crosshatch because I've got a very busy day this morning. I need to get going. So there it is. We're just gonna get it in the oven for 20 minutes with the lid on and 20 minutes with the lid off. Here is loaf number one. Obviously this is the one that just followed the normal procedure, whereas the rest of them will be in the fridge for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, etc. But nice and fluffy. Okay, this is day 2 bread. Gonna be doing this one. That was in this, I didn't have another basket, so it just went into a regular bread loaf pan. And I'm just gonna score it right down the middle. I'm keeping this really, really basic. I don't have an oblong cast iron Dutch oven to fit this, so they definitely get a little bit misshapen whenever I do the long ones. Still a beautiful loaf though of sourdough bread.
But you're too expensive.
I'm slicing this bread up for sandwiches today. All right, well, I hope that that helped you. If you have been wanting to have sourdough bread on the table throughout the week, but have a hard time figuring out the timing and squeezing it into your schedule, sometimes a once a week routine like this that you do on maybe a Saturday or a Sunday can be really helpful to make it a normal part of your routine without having to think about it all week. If you have not yet followed along, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I make sourdough recipes all the time. We love experimenting with sourdough here in the kitchen. I also share what we eat throughout the week through my What We Eat in a Week videos and Cook With Me videos. So if you need more inspiration in the kitchen, make sure to follow along. Thank you so much for stopping by our farmhouse.